I want to also thank Judy and Jesse. It's really great to see accessibility and inclusion as part of this lecture. So thank you. And thanks everybody for joining me today. My name is Corey. I've got the theme on the road again today, and it looks like my ability to screen share is disabled. So how do we fix that? Here we go. Alrighty. So when Javier came to me with the theme on the road again, my response was, of course, because I'm very comfortable on the road and I spend a lot of time on it. I also happen to enjoy Willie Nelson, who created this song. And this is a picture from 10 years ago of me seeing Willie Nelson at Floor Country Store in Helotes, Texas, which is northwest of San Antonio. It is the location where he became famous. So it was a privilege to see him in his home environment there. And I can relate to Willie in quite a few ways that don't include his love of weed. However, it does include his love of being on the road. And over the last couple of years, I have found myself in many places. So this is what my physical path has looked like over the last couple of years. And that's because I've been committed to remote work and the idea of freedom of movement. It's something that I always wanted to do and decided to go after the pandemic. Javier also informed me that your coursework involves thinking about perspectives beyond career, and I couldn't help then to relate this meandering path to the meandering path of my own career, which looks also very not linear. Over the years, I've seen many different industries, company sizes, market types, skill sets, you name it. But all of it built up this skill set and a knowledge that I have that landed me where I am today. The first thing I did was look up the definition of career, just to make sure we all shared the same understanding of the language. And unsurprisingly, very basic description: an occupation undertaken for a significant period of a person's life. But I noticed two things that I didn't understand before, which is that definition did not include the mention of tying career to pay, to earnings. And secondly, I noted a verb form of career that I laughed at the accuracy of and also the savage nature of it, which is that to career means to move swiftly in an uncontrolled manner in a specified direction. I thought this was a little too accurate for comfort. So having absorbed that definition, I decided that what I wanted to focus this talk around today is moving beyond uncontrol. How do we get beyond that verb definition of swiftly moving in an uncontrolled manner in our careers? It starts from the beginning of life. This is me hiding from the cruel worlds in which I had zero control. In life, you start with uncontrol. Your frame of reference is given to you. The perspective that you have is not really yours. For example, I came from a small town of 2,500 people, mostly from the same religion, race, and cultural upbringing. In that framing that we're born into but don't choose, we can use tools to better understand the world. We can use art and design from a very young age to explore interesting topics and activities in order to make sense of that perspective that has been handed to us. Our thoughts are not always our own as children. We are deeply influenced by the world around us. Social scientists have kind of agreed on an average that about 60% of our behavior is determined by our environment, not our genetics. That means something different for everyone. Every single one of you have come from a different context and a different point of view. To a semi-rural kid like myself growing up, For example, it meant that suburbs were the big city. And because of that, when I was exploring through art and design, I built and explored cities in my mind that looked identical to the world that I saw out of the car window. If you look closely, you can see some indicators of my age, being a Blockbuster in the top right and Taco Bell, home of tacos, in the bottom right. As a child, I was able to find a little bit of control through what I designed as a way to organize the chaos that I was feeling around me. My first invention was what I called the compactionizer, which was a way to organize my mess of school belongings into a nice, cohesive folder that could hang in my locker. The other factor here that helps us as young people grow a broader perspective beyond the one that we were handed is imagination. And that's where we really start to build our unique points of view. I used my hands to explore distant concepts from worlds that were beyond mine. I didn't grow up with rhinos, for example, but I found myself emulating them through the use of clay, nonetheless. I played with material, with color, with shape, with composition, a lot of it with no real aim in mind. So through that, I began to form an identity there, as we all do in our teen years. And that perspective, while in formation, is still very limited by the end of our teenage years. With that said, even though we have such a small perspective in that moment, we are expected to begin forming answers to a really big question, which is, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I can tell you in hindsight, particularly now, it's a very absurd question to ask someone who is 17 or 18. So as I moved into my college years, for me, design was a path of constant learning. It was something that I understood could be applied across many practices and still get me a steady paycheck, which for many people is reality. Bills are part of the equation of life. And so design was my path to be in a career where I could constantly learn and grow. But design also allowed me to honor and nurture the creative side of myself through play, as is, I think, displayed here in one of my ceramic pieces from college days. This play is where boundary pushing is expected and celebrated. And that's one of the really great things about the environment that you are in right now, which is school. It's designed for play. It's designed to push boundaries, to think in new ways outside of the societal constructs that often exist in life and outside of that smaller frame of reference that we were brought up in. So through that environment, I was able to start questioning the quote-unquote design of everyday things, as Don Norman puts it, and greatly expand my perspective that I had as a child and a teen. That helped me start to really think about and determine what career might mean to me and where I would go with it. I went from drawing those cities made for cars in my childhood to criticizing them and thinking about how we dedicate space to machines versus people. Design showed me that toolkit for exploring, for learning, for problem solving at any scale, small or huge, whether that is a building or an entire urban fabric. Design showed me a flexible way of thinking and asking questions. I think design is a really great career for skeptics because the most important part of design, in my opinion, is being able to find the right question to ask. And if I had to summarize one of my most important learnings from my time in college, it's that asking the right question is how you build a strong foundation for your life's evolving perspectives. This is an example of my senior project from college, where I started questioning all of what society had been telling me about Texas culture and what the actual ramifications and wicked problems were underneath that accepted culture, like challenges in healthcare, like challenges with methane emissions. And so again, it came down to starting to ask questions and letting that guide my perspective. But that's also an acknowledgement that we don't know what we don't know. And that's kind of what I came out of college feeling really deeply in my soul. And being able to expand our perspective in life means being a lifelong student, not just being a student in school, but continuing to have that mindset when you leave. So when I entered the workforce, the career, I tried some things in my first few years. First, I went to an architecture firm and worked in-house, doing print work, branding, web design, quite a wide variety of work that I really enjoyed. That was in San Antonio, Texas. But I got restless very quickly after a couple of years and decided that I wanted to move somewhere that would really challenge me and force change in me. So I decided to go to New York City, like a lot of folks, including your fearless teacher who has also lived in New York City. And so when I got there, I was staying on a couch until I found an apartment and a job. I started, the opportunities I was finding were very different than what I had found presented to me in college and also in my first job working in-house in architecture. I found jobs in agencies and in enterprise work. And so my first job in New York was working on IBM digital experiences. I didn't love it, so I moved on and tried something else. I did some agency work, for example, on Chobani packaging. It was really cool seeing my work out in the world, but I was still kind of bored and not enjoying the process as much. And I didn't feel like I was growing, which was the whole point of me moving to New York for myself. I thought that career vision would simply reveal itself to me if I tried enough things. But instead of achieving the noun definition of career, I was actually careering still. I was hurtling towards a destination uncontrollably. So I learned another big lesson here, which is that I needed to be a lot more intentional about my growth and what that looked like. I did not nail it. So this is when I shifted into UX and product design because of the systems thinking that I saw in it. And I'm a very analytical person. I have an analytical mind. And so that was a good match for me. The big lesson was to not let your work choose you. You need to choose your work. And it's something that takes a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error to really embed in you. As part of this journey through career and job, what I got paid for, I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that part of choosing work is also choosing the unpaid work that you do. Because if we go back to that original definition of career, it has nothing to do with money, even though culturally we're told that it's about what you are earning money with. So your hobbies are also part of your career and you should take pride in them. During a time when I felt a lot was uncontrolled, my unpaid, on again, off again career of photography gave me more presence and peace of mind than anything else in my life because it helped me step outside of the societal constructs that I was learning about after university. Similarly, I was still deeply engaged in ceramics, and that gave me an avenue for stepping away from within the big concrete city of New York, being able to empty my mind a bit and staying acquainted with dirt. It taught me something really important, ceramics did, which is how to understand the difference between what I could control and what I could not control. Doing ceramics in a cooperative space, for example, means that all I could control was the shaping of the clay. I didn't make the glazes. I didn't control the humidity in the studio. I didn't set the kiln temperatures. I didn't determine where my pieces would be in that kiln and what they'd be in proximity to. I didn't control other people navigating that really tiny New York space near my work. So I learned what it meant to do my best within what I could control and accept the outcomes otherwise. Moving back to the paid work, the paid career, I wanted to better engage both sides of my brain equally. And so I considered ways to do that, career paths for doing that. Once I acknowledged the need and desire for myself to engage both sides of my brain, I was able to recognize UX and product design as a good path for that, for me personally. And so this is our growth moment, our paid career growth moment. That fork in the road started with me going to Grubhub initially. And a lot of the work that I started with was doing stuff I already knew how to do pretty well, which was sketching as a means to solve problems and iterate on them with lower effort. And doing so helped me to align with my teammates and colleagues, my collaborators very quickly. And so that low fidelity work is what leads to high fidelity, the idea that most of us start out with about what design actually looks like. That low fidelity thinking, the sketching, the play, made these high fidelity experiences easy to come up with. This, for example, being a driver mobile application that I designed at the shipping broker startup Transcends. In this shipment tracking application, you can see many notifications and status checks across these screens. This type of design work includes a crucial tenet of design that we are all familiar with and that you engage with very heavily in school, which is design critique. And so you are doing this now, and it will be just as important in the rest of your life as a designer. Because the best design work is a team sport. At anything in life, including design, growth inherently requires a willingness to first be bad. So if you are not willing to start out being bad, to start out failing, you're not going to grow and be better. You don't start out perfect. And feedback and critique is part of that mindset, a willingness to be open, to learn, to start by being bad and getting better together. And so that requires learning how to ask the right questions and how to learn from others. If you can do that, you will succeed, because learning is the compounding of knowledge over time. Speaking of learning, I have done a lot of it in my career. I was super lucky across multiple jobs to be working with really great user researchers, for example. They taught me how to ask questions very well and different methods and tools for doing so. Methods like diary studies and synthesis, quantitative measurement techniques, qualitative measurement techniques, what automated tools you could use for user testing, usability testing best practices. There is a giant toolbox of ways to ask questions in the product design world. That included asking more abstract anthropological questions, like understanding human motivation and influence in a way that can be informative for ongoing work, as illustrated in this pamphlet that I designed with colleagues at Grubhub to communicate new personas that we were going to share across the business. So we did the research, we identified the motivations and influences of people so that we would understand how to build the right products for them. And we aligned that across the entire business, including our marketing departments. And we did that through this really nice pamphlet. So it was great to take digital experiences out and put it in an ephemeral object. I've also learned to work with analysts and data scientists who know how to parse data to build hypotheses and how to track the success of a design. It enabled me to run my own queries and understand that data is just one input for interpretation. It's never a clean-cut answer. This path through product design has also allowed me to lean into some of my superpowers as a systems thinker. And so that is something I would encourage you to think about. What are your superpowers and how can you lean into them as you think about your path forward? In my day job as a product designer, I live in the digital realm. And that means I'm designing for humans interacting with systems, with technology. It means needing to lay out the path of that human next to the front end and back end systems and illuminating all of the cause and effect along that path. In this example from Transfix, doing that helped me locate unnecessary blockades that operational teams, humans, had put in place as a response to very specific situations. Being able to acknowledge this block, slowing down the entire company's process, was how I was able to help the company improve process. And I did it all through these interaction flows. Sometimes my work also requires understanding really complex workflows between multiple different types of people on top of those systems in order to expose where human users are experiencing the most friction with a system or an application. Product design has a lot of similarities with other design fields in that it is still very human-centered and about centering human needs. Here, for example, I mapped out all of the friction experienced in the beginning to end process that involved 7 different types of user roles for people performing different functions at a business and outside of a business as customers. This was eventually organized into priorities, and it created our plan many years into the future as a business. Always seeking out. But I think where product design differs a little bit from other design fields is that just like in our lovely US legal code, corporations are people too in product design. It's important for a product designer to understand not just the human needs, but also the business needs. By using a methodology called service design blueprinting, which is what you're seeing here, I laid out all tasks done by both our internal service people and external users, and the different tools, artifacts, and contexts that enabled the completion of those tasks. Every idea for improving their processes, which is shown at the bottom there with the yellow stickies, that all was tied back to business targets, which you see at the very top. Systems thinking isn't just a process of discovery, though. Just as importantly, it's a practice of communication, as all design is. This decision tree, done by my Google colleague, Michael Sun, gave engineers the information they needed to understand how to implement if-then rules for creating a promotion code at Google Store in our content management system. There were about 20 of these diagrams that were required to set the rules for these 2 little boxes. So as you can see, the system's considerations are complex, even though to the user, to the viewer, it's rendered in a very simplified user interface. And I'm sorry about the blurry, But another reality of product design is corporate privacy and not wanting to breach your contract. So you get to see a little box there. And for one last and super crazy example of just how complex systems thinking can get in product design land. As a lead product designer, I'm responsible for the big picture and making sure that the vision and story of really large scale efforts are cohesive and understood by everyone on the team. And by team, I'm not just talking about designers, but also engineers, product managers, marketing, sales, customer service, finance, anyone in the company. These screens that are tiny because there's so many of them were part of the handoff that our team of 2 designers and 1 content strategist did at Google Store. This little diagram is telling the same story. It's the same solution as those hundreds of screens on the previous slide, but it's abstract to a high level so that anybody, regardless of their level of understanding about those details, can understand that story and the life cycle for promotion code at Google Store. One of the lessons that I learned a little bit later in my career that I think is really important is how to bring people along with you when you are telling these stories and deciding the right way to communicate the story you need to communicate. Design is a really complex thing that mostly happens in our brains. But as designers, we have to learn how to visualize and communicate our ideas. Because no matter the level of understanding, people need to understand where your mind is, what you are thinking, and it helps everybody move forward together. It's particularly important, even when things are messy. Design is super, super messy. And a lot of the times we're nervous that we can't provide people with a clean-cut explanation. And that's okay. It's important to show others what design process looks like, because that's how they'll understand why we do the crazy things that we do. So over the years, I've grown enormously as a designer. And at that moment at Google, I was working for one of the most sought after corporations. But I still struggled to feel passion in my day job because I hadn't yet aligned my paid work to my values and my personal needs. I wanted things like freedom of movement, financial security, kind colleagues, a company that valued diversity, the ability to have challenging systems problems to solve, and also to commit my time to something that I really believed in. And so it's kind of asking myself like, oh man, is this all there is? The cog in the wheel? No. The good news is no, that is not all there is. The important thing is to understand what your needs and motivations are, because they are unique to you and nobody else. You need to learn them and take them to heart, because that will guide you. Things like anxiety that you feel in school and that you will feel in your career beyond school, that's information for you to understand what's working for you and what's not. It's going to help you search for your why and make sure that your soul is fed in the work that you do. Because life and work, they get hard. They get harder. So I committed to my needs in a job, and it took me many months to find a good fit. That's how I found myself where I am now at Planet Labs, where I lead design for what we call the Earth Data Platform, which is an entirely new platform. And that's data from multiple sources, including but not limited to our own satellite constellations that we launch into outer space. So what makes this job exciting to me is that there are countless applications for the data that we provide to people, including things like the ability to measure the amount of water in soil or the amount of methane in the atmosphere. It helps local governments to reduce illegal deforestation and mining activity. It helps governments and nonprofit organizations anticipate wildfires. It also helps in catastrophic response. For example, the recent catastrophes in Israel, in Syria, all across the world, in Morocco. We're able to use satellite data to decide where action needs to take place first. And we distribute that information in a democratic manner for the betterment of humanity. We are at the forefront of this technology with an infinite number of problems to solve. It's a little different than my previous jobs in that in my previous jobs, the problem space was more well-defined. The use cases that we tackled were fewer. Now I'm in a space that is literally infinite, with infinite potential. And it's here where I'm able to combine everything I've learned across that meandering career path and also be able to merge my love of both science and design. So working at Planet so far has allowed me to confirm that working towards a mission does actually matter to me. And it is what I count among those unique needs for me in the work too. So in closing thoughts, keep exploring your real or metaphorical roads. Be curious in your work, both paid and unpaid careers. Choosing to grow both in this class, in school, and beyond is going to expand your perspective in ways that will be unexpected and delightful. You'll not only be able to connect with more people in really interesting ways, in the way that I think Javier and I have been able to connect and grow our friendship over the years, but also you'll be rewarded with really great happiness just in being able to know yourself. So with that, I am happy to take questions, and I hope everybody asks one so I can see everybody's lovely face.
That was quite amazing, Corey. Thank you so much. I've always wondered what it is you do, so this is the clearest I've gotten. There were a lot of amazing questions, so if everybody's shy, I will ask what they've written down.
Hi, may I ask some question for you, Ruby? Hi, sorry, it's easy. I'm sorry, my camera was started, so I can't show you with picture. I'm apologize for that. Yes, so I have reviewed your LinkedIn, and you also mentioned that you are right now working with the satellites and working with the planet and satellites. That's a very amazing project. I love that. So, but you know, we are graduate students, so I'm a little bit curious. I'm a little bit curious about your first interview. So, things like that. Let me see what did I work?
My first interview with Planet?
No, the first review of your job. So can you tell me? So will you have more detail about your first experiences and what did you prepare for your interview?
Like in my early jobs, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. That feels long ago. I do remember there's one thing that's constant now all the way back to when I was first interviewing, and that's a portfolio and the importance of a portfolio. I think the reality is that most companies, it's not that they don't care about the work that you've done in school, but they want to understand how you can apply what you've learned to their problems and what they need to solve.
Right.
And so when you are preparing your portfolio for those early interviews, and most of what you have is from school or from internships, keep that in mind. Think about ways that you can illuminate to them the way you think about problems and solving them and showing the impact that you created on that problem as a result of your design work. And when they're able to see that type of thinking, they'll want to talk to you.
I see. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a helpful question. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Also, one more thing I want to mention. I've gotten hundreds of no's over the years. I've gotten hundreds of emails not responded to, especially in New York. I physically went to offices. Back when I still wanted to work in print, I went to Pentagram's office and tried to hand a portfolio directly to publisher. It didn't happen. But it's important that you keep trying, and through that process, you keep learning. Even in this last cycle where I interviewed, I adjusted my portfolio every interview, because every interview I got information about what was clear, what was intriguing, and what people wanted to see. And obviously you have to adjust it to who you're interviewing with, but just keep that learning mindset. Also recognize that interviewing is a practice in its own. It's very common for those of us who have been in the field for longer to go ahead and take interviews for jobs that maybe we don't totally want, because we want the practice of interviewing to be polishing up. So get a friend, get a family member to help you practice question and response. I think it'll help a lot.
I see. Thanks so much.
Come on. Don't be shy.
Cheryl, are you here? She had a wonderful question, so I will ask on her behalf. In your design process, sorry, somebody else.
Shales is here in the chat.
Give me 1 second. I'll ask another question on behalf of Yishen. How do you go about getting the attention of HR when you submit your resumes as well as portfolios? What kind of preparations do we as freshers just out of school with no minimal work experience have to do when we're interviewing with others whose resumes are, I guess, better? Can you share your experiences when you got your first internship job?
Yeah. I don't think about HR at all when I am trying to get attention. I think what I have found the most successful is finding people in the company who I can relate to and who are at least tangential to the role that I want or I'm interested in. One tactic you can use is asking for an informational interview where you are not interviewing, but you are wanting to learn more about the position. And that's a way to get to know someone who would be your colleague, and also to learn more about the role. And it's just as important that when you are interviewing, I think when you're coming out of school, it feels very much like you are begging for a job. But keep in mind that you're interviewing them too. And so in things like informational interviews or reaching out to people cold on LinkedIn, for product design, LinkedIn is very much the go-to for connecting with people. It'll be different in other fields. But just reach out and be very clear about how much time you are asking for, why you are contacting them. Provide a couple of the questions that you want to cover. Just show that you're intentional. You're not asking for handouts. Like you are there to learn and to be humble. Also, always be humble in those situations. The other thing too is when I think back on all the jobs I've gotten, I feel two of them were jobs that I actually applied to without knowing somebody. The majority of them were situations where I had a connection, whether that was friend of a friend of a friend or a colleague of a colleague, some type of connection. And that LinkedIn does a nice job of helping make that visible. But I always protest people who say it's a waste of time to submit your resume, because I disagree. I've gotten 2 jobs out of that method. it's important that you spend good time on your resume and make sure that it's clear and curated. I think it's hard in school. I remember it being very hard for me to curate my work. I wanted to show the whole breadth of what I could do. But in reality, the hiring managers are going to spend 10 seconds glancing at your resume and your portfolio to see if you're worth talking to. And so make sure that your classic design is in place for your resume. The type hierarchy is there so that you are calling attention to the right things. So those little details matter as well. But go after every avenue. Cold call people, cold email people, submit your application. You could try going to conferences as well. Try it all. Just remember, you're going to get a lot of no's, and to just keep your head up and keep going at it, because at some point your effort, your talent will line up with the luck.
Thank you so much for your talk, Corey. I wanted to ask you a question as well. It was really different when I heard you say choose your work and don't let it choose you, because ever since I was young, I have wanted to be a designer just because I was good at sketching. And so in a way, I let it choose me, and I really enjoy it today. And like, I won't want it any other way. But in a way, I have let my work choose me, basically. And you also mentioned intentional about development of how do you want to develop, knowing everything that you know, and knowing, like, figuring everything that you have figured out in today's date. What would you do differently if you were a college grad recently passed out, and like you have all the information that you have today, but what would you do differently?
Really good question. I think I definitely would have tried to go towards product design earlier. At the time when I was in university, UX wasn't quite as common of a field yet. And so we didn't cover it as much in school, and things are a lot different today. And so I might have tried to be a little bit more exploratory or imaginative in what my options were and thinking ahead. So for example, right now, AI has been with us, but it's growing exponentially. Are there things you can think about in these like very nascent, fresh, new potential areas of work that you can go explore? I think for me, coming out of school, bills were very top of mind, and so for me, it was I got to pay my bills. Give me any job, and that's okay. That's okay, because you can learn from anything, and that's something I wish I had recognized sooner. Is everything is learning experience, and at least for me, I've learned way more in my career about what I don't like than what I do. Mm-hmm. But being able to identify what I don't like and cut that out gets me in the direction of what I actually enjoy. And so it was all part of that growth and learning, and worth it in the end.
Definitely. I'm also going to be quoting you a lot on design as a team sport. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And one thing I would note too, you mentioned that you left sketching and you're very good at it. I don't know if I agree with the way that career is communicated today as this concept that you have to commit to. I think life has phases. And if you wake up one day and decide, no, sketching isn't doing it for me anymore, like I'm not growing, I'm not enjoying it, like find something else. Don't be afraid. There are so many skill sets that you are going to pick up in life that are adaptable. And one of the things I really do love about design is it is so incredibly flexible, because at the end of the day, design is about problem solving and communication. And there are 100 fields where that is super valuable. And so if you wake up one day and decide you kind of want to shift and choose your work more, think about those skill sets that can shift.
No, definitely. I haven't sketched in so long, but that was the ignition of why I chose design. Now my reasons are completely different from when I started. But I completely agree with you. It's always evolving.
I used to love sketching too, and I don't do it anymore. So
I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but I just haven't picked it up.
maybe later in life you will. You never know. More questions?
There is a question in the chat. With your extensive experience spanning various companies from seed level to enterprise, how do you adapt your design approach to fit the needs of different organizations, sizes, and structures? With a growing emphasis on accessibility in design, could you share some key considerations or best practices that you always keep in mind when working on a project? A great question.
That is a really big question. We'll break it up into those two parts. So, how do I adapt design approach to fit the different needs? Startups are very different from enterprise in approach because when you are starting, your most important thing is to validate what you are bringing into the market and to validate an idea and market fit, whether or not it's going to survive in the markets, aka people buying it, requires that you move really fast to test your product in that market. And that way you use very little process, you set very few standard procedures for a design process. You do a lot more quick ideation, quick methods of testing, very close collaboration. You play a lot of roles, you wear a lot of hats. You probably don't have that many metrics to work off of. And by metrics, I mean things like quarterly revenue or the number of clicks on a button, conversion rates, things like that. It may not be as mature. So you're working in a very ambiguous space and you have to bring structure to it just enough that you can do that validation, but no more, because then you're wasting time. And so as you proceed through series and maturity of a company, you bring a little bit more standardization in because you're now collaborating across your teams, you are solving bigger problems, you have more scope. When you get to the level of enterprise, you are dealing with enormous scope sometimes, depending on how many colleagues you have, the resources of that company. For example, like Google, I was kind of known as the person who would whip complicated alignments into shape. The projects that I worked on required coordinating across the company with people who worked in entirely different areas and did not have our same reporting chain, did not interact with us whatsoever. And so in those ways, I had to put structure in place to create recurring touch points. I used documentation a lot more. So there were also a lot of other resources I could take advantage of. At Google, for example, speaking of accessibility, there are entire teams dedicated to good accessibility process. And when you launch anything at Google, you have to put it through this approval process for accessibility. There are training materials for accessibility at big companies like Google that you will never find in a startup. And so in a startup, it's a lot more proactive. You have to be more proactive in your growth and your learning. In an enterprise company, that learning may be more readily available to you through learning via colleagues, just observing what they're doing, through taking advantage of training documentation like Google has, their process of accessibility. To expand a little bit further on the questions of key considerations for best practice, part of that depends on the type of like the artifact that you're delivering. For example, at Planet, we don't really have mobile users. We have some tablet. And so when we're considering responsive design, we don't have to consider it as deeply in the mobile space. That's absolutely not the case at Google. At Google, we were designing for multiple responsive points. And things like accessibility, Google is like, if you want to learn about accessibility, there's your good resource. There are a lot of really great design resources on the internet today for allyship. And the biggest considerations there that I would recommend trying to master as a good foundation are things like color contrast, things like understanding how screen readers work and setting alt tags, making sure that you are designing components and relating them to each other in a way where somebody can click through on their keyboard and have those read in an understandable manner.
Corey,
yeah.
We have 4 minutes. So I will ask one more fun question.
Yeah.
There's a few that have kind of the same thing. Olaya asks, have you gotten any design opportunities through photography work that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
Oh, I don't think so. However, I have used photography a lot at my design jobs. I did a lot of photography when I worked in architecture at Plato. I did photography for IBM, actually, when we were doing personas and those went live. At Transfix, I did photography. Again, startup environment. You find opportunities. I found opportunities to use photography. So not finding design through photography, but definitely the other way around.
Awesome. Well, Corey, thank you very, very much. And Jesse and our other interpreter, thank you so much. And everybody, have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.